Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining me and thank you for coming along today to this webinar on recognising elder abuse. I wish to acknowledge the traditional owners of the country throughout Australia and where you are joining us from, and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. I pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. This webinar on recognising elder abuse is brought to you by Compass. Compass.info is the national website connecting people to services and information tackling elder abuse in all its forms. Compass is created by Elder Abuse Action Australia, or the EAAA, with funding from the Australian Government, the Attorney General's Department. Compass is committed to equitable and inclusive responses to end elder abuse for everyone affected, including people with diverse characteristics and life experiences. Elder Abuse Action Australia, or the EAAA, is the voice for action to eliminate elder abuse through advocacy, policy development, best practice, research, and capacity building. That's why your involvement today is just so important. If you know someone or you are experiencing elder abuse yourself, please don't hesitate to go to compass.info. There's also the Elder Abuse Hotline, 1-800-ELDER-HELP. That's 1-800-353-374. 1-800-353-374. There's also very helpful phone numbers that you can call on the website, but Elder Help is a great first port of call. During this session, I urge you to ask questions in the chat box. We would like to get as many as possible. We ask that everyone be respectful and please do not name or identify people. Abuse doesn't discriminate. People of all ages, ethnicity and gender may be vulnerable or at risk. Today, in this webinar, we bring out the experts from across the community to help you identify key risk factors and early warning signs that are connected to the abuse of older people. They will highlight the types of abuse that can be inflicted, common behaviours of perpetrators, and tactics that can be used. The webinar will also identify ways you can respond if you're experiencing abuse or if you witness or suspect elder abuse is happening to someone you know and love and care about. We will explore, as I say, the risk factors, environmental factors, personal factors, perpetrator factors, and find out more about the warning signs that you may never have considered connected to elder abuse. While I've got your undivided attention for the next hour, I'd also like to say that I've got a surprise for you. For the first time, if you're a veteran of these webinars, for the first time, we're having a poll. So please participate, engage with the poll. You're really going to be multitasking during this webinar. Now, the questions. Has elder abuse touched your life personally or the life of a family member or friend? Do you think elder abuse is widely understood? Do you think enough is being done to address elder abuse in the community? So you can see the poll in front of you. It's just a yes or no, a single choice. We don't ask for any more information. So it's something that you will be able to answer very quickly by just putting your cursor over or your finger over to say yes or no to each of those. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. And the good thing is that once we get this discussion underway, we will come back to the results of this Recognising Elder Abuse poll. Tile has been advocating for against elder abuse for many years, since at least 2019. He's the coordinated senior lawyer of the Older Persons Advocacy and Legal Service, OPALS, and he joined them in August 2019. OPALS is Queensland's first health justice partnership, providing free legal and social work assistance to older people who are experiencing or at risk of elder abuse. So Tile Imo from OPALS in Queensland, welcome. Sonia de Metza is on the board of Elder Rights Advocacy Victoria. She's the CEO of Loddon Campaspe Multicultural Services in Central Victoria. She previously worked as Deputy CEO of the ACT Disability, Aged and Carers Advocacy Service, ADACAS, in Canberra, where she advocated for the rights of older people, predominantly from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. Dr. Libby Hindmarsh has been working in general practice for over 30 years. For 10 years, she worked in Aboriginal health on Elcho Island in the Northern Territory, and she is in Aboriginal general practice on the outskirts of Sydney. She's a GP supervisor and involved in many aspects of GP education. Since 1992, she worked on projects with the Royal Australian College of General Practice, the RACGP, in the area of family, domestic violence, and family domestic abuse and violence. She is the co-editor with Professor Kelsey Hegarty of the college's fifth edition, Abuse and Violence, Working with Our Patients in General Practice. And she is the chairperson for the college's Faculty of Specific Interest, Abuse and Violence in Families Network. She's committed to keeping the older members of the Australian community safe from abuse and violence. Welcome to our panelists. Thanks for joining us today. We've got a lot to get through for the wait. May I ask you briefly, what does elder abuse look like? Could I start with you, Libby? And I know that we've got to culturally have some sensitivity to the term elder abuse, but if you'd like to define it and then just talk us through that cultural sensitivity.
Well, the World Health Organization says that abuse of older people or elder abuse is a single or a repeated act or a lack of appropriate action occurring in a relationship where there is an expectation of trust and that it causes harm or distress to an older person. So it's about physical, sexual, psychological, emotional, financial. It can be abandonment, neglect, and it also that loss of dignity and respect. So that's what the World Health Organization defines it as. So that's a useful place for us to start. In Aboriginal communities and Torres Strait Island communities, the use of the word elder abuse is not really very comfortable, because for them, elders are somebody who is very, very important members of their community. So for them, we should maybe be thinking about calling it the abuse of older people.
Libby, thank you for that, because it's a very important distinction. So Sonia de Metza, what does elder abuse look like in the communities that you work with?
I think for people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, it can often relate to a person's culture or the way they live their life that perhaps they've brought with them from another country or from their family that might be, in opposition to what we define and what we see as elder abuse. So, for example, in many cultures, there can be, and also in predominantly Anglo-Caucasian cultures, there can be the assets for care arrangements that can become elder abuse. So where people kind of perceive property as held by the community or by the family, whereas here in Australia, it's the individual, the person's name on the title deeds that indicates who owns that property. And there can be some real clashes as to ownership, cultural beliefs. These can be things that can contribute to elder abuse happening in the multicultural communities.
So can I just ask you, does that mean if dad dies and mum's left in the family home, which would also be in her name, there could be a situation in some communities where the son might sort of say, well, I'll take over things from here and try and get the house? What do you mean?
Yeah, so that can be a common scenario throughout, whether you're culturally diverse or not. But the situation goes something like this. An elderly woman from a culturally linguistically diverse background who perhaps doesn't speak English very well, her husband died, and perhaps they had gender roles where he would look after the finances and she would stay at home and look after the family. And she's very dependent on her husband and he's no longer there. Then her elder son often might step in and say, look, I'll look after you, mum. We need to buy a property. We need to use the property that you have and you can live with us and look, be with the grandchildren. And sometimes that arrangement doesn't work out. The family might not want the mother-in-law living in the property, and then they might ask her to leave or demand that she leaves. But then the title of the house might remain in the son's name and she has nothing. And that would be elder abuse, where that's not something that she wanted and she never intended to totally give over her assets to her son.
Thank you, Sonia. Well, I'd like to bring you in here, Tile, an overview from you on what elder abuse can look like.
Well, thanks, Philippa. I think in our service, we adopt the World Health Organization definition, and we also, use that intersectional lens that Sonia is talking about as well. I suppose the one thing I'd add to their definitions is that elder abuse is a form of family violence. And I think that our older people are recognised in family violence legislation across Australia as people who can be at risk of or experiencing some kind of form of family violence. And it's a key piece of legislation that we can use to protect older people. But I think it's also important, taking into account the intersectional lens, that the elder abuse presents itself in many ways. Older people may not use that language or that terminology of elder abuse. And so it's really important to have those discussions with older people to really tease out what are the issues that they're seeing and what are the conflicts that they're seeing within their families.
Well, look, I'd like to pick up there. What are the risk factors, Tile? Environmental, personal, and perpetrators. Tell us about what you're seeing, because you work in the health setting. You've recognised something like 14 risk factors.
Yes.
Could you take us through?
Yeah, well, I might caveat my answer by saying that there's no single risk factor that means that a person is experiencing elder abuse. So just because a person is 60, 70, 80 or 90 on its own doesn't mean that they're experiencing elder abuse. But it's important to, understand that these different risk factors together may mean that a person might be at risk. And I also think it's important that we not stereotype people just because they're older, or, to borrow language from the family violence sector, the idea of a perfect victim, that a person experiencing elder abuse is, a fragile person, because often my clients aren't. But in terms of some of the risk factors, it could be their age, obviously, their dependence for care, current family conflict or dysfunction. There could be a history of family violence, and there could be a history of domestic violence. And so it's really important to social isolation if they're living by themselves or if a family member has isolated them, if they're living in a regional and remote community, which means it's harder to access different services to support them. It could be stress or poor coping in care relationships. It's also gender neutral. It can happen to men and older men and older women. Mental illness and dementia can also be a risk factor. Poor literacy and language and cultural barriers, which I think Sonia can also expand on, and also a change in circumstances where they might have received some compensation or a large sum of money somehow, and then you have those family members that might come out of the woodworks and try to get involved, and that there can be risk there for them in terms of financial abuse. It can also be traumatic life events or adult children or dependents with disability, but I think those are mostly intrapersonal types of risk factors. But you've also mentioned that interpersonal, so family conflict, dependency or enmeshment within the family, if there's intergenerational abuse or violence, and carer stress is also another driver of elder abuse. And then I suppose on a bigger level, institutional or systemic, our norms and our cultural beliefs that might be ageist, and the intersectionality of disadvantage for older people who might be from a coloured background, who might be LGBTQ+, and just the mixture of all of those things.
And I was very interested in your thoughts about, the perfect victim, someone who is fragile. But it's also people who are strong, who have agency, and
absolutely,
that you mustn't stereotype this.
That's right. A lot of my clients are sometimes the best advocate for themselves, and they're trying really hard to make things happen, but they're also wanting to navigate and maintain that relationship with their family member. So a part of our role is to hear from them, what does justice look like for them? What kind of outcomes are they looking for? Because often they just want the abuse to stop, but want the relationship to continue.
Well, Libby, over to you now. What do GPs notice in terms of risk factors, and how's this being addressed in the education and training of GPs?
Well, it's interesting that the National Elder Abuse Prevalence Study came out in December last year and showed that 15%, or 1 in 6 of old Australians, were reporting that they had experienced some form of abuse. So it's not likely, they're not likely to walk through the door to the GP and say, I'm being abused. So one needs to look at what's, happening to them. And they're more likely to become involved in this if they've got poor physical and psychological health, and if they're more socially isolated. So, and then of course we know if people start to develop dementia, then their risk of abuse increases quite substantially. Yes, there has been some education going on with GPs. There are something like 35,000 of them in Australia. So
Wow.
It's quite a big task. But certainly it's really important that GPs are aware of and are willing to intervene in this situation.
And we're going to get back to how GPs are trying to assess patients' vulnerability in a few minutes. And thank you for that, Libby. What are you seeing, Sonia, in multicultural communities?
Well, I think those we've just really covered a lot, and one of the common elements is the dependency. Is a very strong dependency can really and sometimes that needs to happen, that is there, but that can also indicate that there is a risk of elder abuse occurring. So within the multicultural communities, I once again, like to lay, I don't want to say that if you have this, that means elder abuse is there, but it's just something to be aware of, when just looking at whether someone's safe or not. So language can be a real obstacle, because if you don't speak English, then, or your understanding is very limited, then your ability to articulate your need for help or to communicate what is happening can be really compromised. So language is definitely, you know, can be a risk factor in terms of being able to express that you need help or that you're in trouble. Also, the cultural context can create a bit of a risk factor. If you're not understanding the cultural environment in Australia, and that it conflicts with your own beliefs or your own practices or the way you did things back at home, this can also create an issue. So not to say that if you come from a diverse culture that means there's elder abuse, but that can be something that highlights that there might be some elder abuse happening.
And look, we're getting some questions in the chat room. Where can we go for help? And we are going to explore that. And also one of the other questions was, who's the best professional to approach? And I might just quickly get your thoughts there before we go to,
yes,
you know, the red flags and warning signs. So Sonia, who's the best professional to approach if you are from a cult community?
Such a good question, and I want to answer this not just for the COUT community, but for anyone where there might be risk, the risk of elder abuse. So what you need to understand, and what has been my experience in supporting people, is that there's often not just one solution or one person who's going to solve the elder abuse. Elder abuse often requires a multifaceted approach to be able to provide support and assistance to the person experiencing elder abuse. That could be a health professional, a legal professional, counselling, psychological, psychosocial support, a whole spectrum. And what you need to do is you need to get knowledge for yourself, the person who's concerned about someone else, or if you're experiencing it yourself, you need to get knowledge. And one of the best ways to get that is the Older Persons Advocacy Network has a hotline that you can ring up, and there are organisations in every single state and territory that can provide advocacy support and warm referrals and information that you need to be able to understand what's going on.
And we're also getting some feedback in the chat room that these advocacy services, which are in every state, and they're also on compass.info, and we'll be talking more about them shortly, are super helpful. So in terms of the best professionals to approach, I want to just now go to the red flags and the warning signs and have a talk to Libby, because, you know, what do GPs notice in terms of risk factors? But I understand that you have not risk factors, but red flags or warning signs. And I understand, Libby, you've got, as a GP, and GPs have a special tool in their armoury when it comes to elder abuse, a kind of index. Could you talk us through that, please?
Well, the Elder Abuse Suspicion Index was developed by primary health people in Canada, and it's a tool that we've taught to some of the GPs and sort of advocated through some of the teaching and things that we've done. So this might be very useful to other people to think about too. It's a way of encapsulating what we might be trying to ask. So there's the first question is, have you relied on people for any of the following: bathing, dressing, shopping, banking, or meals? And that goes back to what Sonia was saying about people becoming more dependent, and what we were saying before, that that as we became more physically or psychologically dependent on people, that puts us at some risk. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. So that's the first question about to think about then with yourself or with people that you know. Is this person needing more help? The second question is about asking, has anyone prevented you from doing all these sort of things? So GPs sometimes notice that somebody's not taking their medication, and that's because somebody has not been enabling them to get it, or that they've lost their glasses or their hearing aid. So preventing you from getting the things you need. The third question is about, have you been upset because someone talked to you in a way that made you feel ashamed or threatened? And the fourth question is about, has anyone tried to force you to sign papers or use your money against your will? So this is about the financial stuff we've been talking about. And the fifth question is, has anybody made you afraid? Have they touched you in ways you didn't want or hurt you physically? So this is about sexual abuse and about physical abuse. And then the sixth question is for us to reflect on what's happening with this person. Are they becoming withdrawn? Are they looking thin or malnourished? Have they got bruises? You know, what's happening? And have you noticed that some of these things have been happening in the last 12 months? So they're a way of thinking about those different forms of abuse, and having a way of asking people.
That's super helpful, and the chat room is really going gangbusters on this suspicion index and wondering where do they get a link to this. This has been posted on compass.info, so that's compass.info, and it'll be on the front page. Very easy to access. And Libby, thank you so much for taking us through that. Tile, you've got a whole lot of red flags. And I'm just wondering if you could list those. We have these lists, but something that's very tangible. And I think for something that can be hidden, these are very, very helpful resources. Take it away, Tile.
Thanks, Philippa. I think I saw a question about what role do financial institutions have in responding to elder abuse, and I think noticing the red flags is an important answer. And the Australian Financial Complaints Authority has a best practice approach on how to identify elder abuse or financial elder abuse. But the work that I do is sort of translatable because I work in health settings and hospitals, and I'm often doing this training, and I'm often talking to health professionals and health administrators and social workers about how do you pick up these red flags or these warning signs that someone might be experiencing elder abuse. And again, I think it's important to follow on from Libby's comments, picking up on injuries that don't match the description. If it's potential physical abuse, has there been threats of harm to the person? Is there an existence of a domestic violence order? Are they fearful of being touched? And I suppose that's also important if you're looking for red flags around sexual abuse. Do they have that fear of being touched? Is there internal trauma on their inner thigh, or bruising or tenderness? Changes in their sleep patterns? Are they experiencing nightmares? Are there unexplained sexual transmitted infections? Is there anxiety or fear if potential abuse is a close contact? In terms of financial abuse, it's a bit harder, I suppose, unless the patient is in a hospital for a longer period of time where you can have these conversations. But it could be fearful when asked about personal finances. They're giving large sums of gifts to family members and not really sure. Maybe they're signing a contract or sign some document. They don't know what that document is. Is it an enduring power of attorney? Is it a guarantee for a loan? And so if you're going into a bank, you really want to be seeing that person alone, but also in any setting, really in a hospital or GP setting, you really should be seeing the older person alone to really understand what's happening. And do they understand what's happening? Are there unpaid bills? Are there people living in their home and not contributing to the cost of that home? Or are they have they sort of been isolated in their own home? I had a client who was sort of locked into her own room, but she lived in a 5-bedroom house, and she was all alone in her room, and everyone else had taken over her house, and she was sort of stuck in that room by herself. It could be psychological, social red flags. So it could be, again, disrupted sleep patterns, which I've mentioned. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my list and just making sure I haven't missed anything. Someone withholds their mail. So that's a common one that I see. They might be prevented from seeing family members, from going to church, from a lifestyle or cultural practice. They might be isolated from their grandchildren, or their grandchildren are being used as a sort of, as a weapon against them. If you don't give us X money or whatever, then we won't let you see your grandchildren. There could be derogatory remarks. Gaslighting is a common one as well. Telling someone you've lost your marbles, or you don't understand, or you have dementia, when they potentially don't have dementia and they just have, some cognitive decline. In terms of neglect, and I'm not talking about self-neglect, I mean, a neglect from family members could be over or under medication, following through with a treatment plan not following through, with a treatment plan from their treating doctor, someone denying access to medicines or services. They sound anxious when talking to someone else in the room, prevent services from attending the home, the cleanliness of the house or clothes or care. So you might notice a change in that. And also a deterioration from the usual circumstances. So maybe it's someone that a GP has seen for 20 plus years, and maybe they don't present like in the way that you might normally see them, or they don't look like a person who has the kind of wealth that that they have. They're not dressed in a certain way, but that could also mean other things. So again, we're looking at risk factors, red flags together, not just as individual things to stereotype people.
Exactly. Now, you mentioned an acronym, FVRO. This is very much for Queensland. Are we talking of family violence restraining order?
I said, well, no, I think it's a DVO. So we call them domestic violence orders, but I think they're called AVOs in other states. And yeah, I'm not across what the other states call them.
And look, no, that's fine. Yeah. It was just a sneaky acronym, but all of those are on the website. And people have asked, are we recording this? Yes, we are recording this. It will be available. And, while there might be hundreds of you on this today, we're likely to get thousands more watching the recording. It's a really valuable asset. So a family violence restraining order, thank you, Ian, is a family violence restraining order. So an FVRO. Look, we'll try and avoid the acronyms, but thank you. And Attila, you just signaled something that I really want to ask Sonia about, and that is spiritual, a kind of a spiritual abuse. Now, but what do you mean by that? But is it religious? Is it spiritual? What are you seeing? A cultural kind of abuse?
Well, spiritual abuse, yeah, it can be a kind of cultural abuse. And that's where you're stopping someone. For example, they like to go to church or to mosque on a particular day of the week, and you're caring for that person. You're stopping them from doing that against their will. So that can be a type of spiritual abuse. But I think that was a really comprehensive list of warning signs that there's possibly elder abuse happening. And I kind of want to summarize what Tilly says with the common denominator, that gut feeling where you feel something is not right with the older person. That, for example, they don't look right. They look like, something has happened to them, or they're not living right. They're living in squalor, and they're supposed to be being supported by someone, or all of a sudden someone shows up and they're being extra nice for no good reason with the older person, and then the finances start going missing where something doesn't feel right. And it's really important that in looking at those signs that we are really aware that the older person is not a child. They are an adult. Even if they have cognitive impairment, we need to start with the older person and understand what could possibly be their experience and how they're seeing it and what their concerns are, and not impose our own thoughts and beliefs as to how they should be living their life. Start with the older person. And that can be difficult if they do have cognitive impairment, but it's kind of like just trying to understand what the person is going through and really listening to that gut instinct. Something is not quite right here, and what do I need to do to be able to support that person?
Yes, we've had on the chat room, observation is key. And also it's a human rights issue for that person. But we will talk a little bit more about that. And I want you both, or the three of you, if you could, when you see the warning signs, I'd just like to give you, if you could give us one example to highlight, like one example where you've seen elder abuse and what you've been able to do in that situation. Not necessarily seen it because it's not something you necessarily witness, but someone is being abused, an older person is being abused, you know about it. What do you do? Libby, if I could ask your thoughts there, if you could give us an example, obviously de-identified, and what you did in that situation.
Well, we talked about medication before, and I had an example of an older person who was living out on the homeland and arriving in multiple times with sort of problems with their chest and their breathing and things. And it became very clear that the carer was not helping to administer the medication that this person needed. So we got a family conference together and sat down and talked about what had been happening, what the treatment was that this patient needed, and worked out how this could be done. So I think using in that situation, it was neglect, and we needed to do something about trying to prevent that from happening again and getting the older person well looked after.
And so that person who was the carer was getting a carer's allowance.
Yes,
it was well
right.
recognized that there was that relationship.
Oh,
so
yes.
What did you do? How were you able to resolve this?
Well, we resolved it we tried to resolve it with a family conference, so involving some of the other members of the family. So it was an intergenerational thing. It was a grandparent, there was a daughter, and there was a granddaughter who was actually the carer. So we got the family together, and I explained what I thought was happening. I listened to them about what they thought was happening, and we made a plan to see if we could prevent this happening.
Wow. What dignity and respect you brought to that process in such a difficult conversation that was affecting certainly the life quality of that person not getting their medication. Sonia, could I ask an example where you have had to intervene and what you've done in that situation?
Yes, a woman from a culturally diverse background, her daughter was ripping her off, and with the property, and had transferred it to her name. And this elderly woman really wanted to maintain that contact. And I guess when we're talking about people from culturally diverse backgrounds, it's really important to use interpreters. And it's also important to speak, if you can, to speak to that person alone, away from the family, to really get an understanding of what's going on, and really kind of be able to support them in the way they want to. So that was the approach we took. Unfortunately, this woman decided she didn't want to continue to fight that particular case. So we had to respect the woman's wishes, but it's important that they get information about what elder abuse is, what their rights are, what the law is in Australia, in a language that they can understand.
Exactly. And when you talked about an interpreter, you meant a professional interpreter that is brought in a legal setting, in a health setting, in a social work setting, whatever the setting. We're not talking about a grandchild or a son or daughter doing the interpreting, doing the translating.
No, because that family member is not following, obviously, the professional guidelines that interpreters must follow when they're NAATI interpreted, interpreters, and also there is a bias. There is, you know, a prejudice in the way they might look at the problem, which they're bringing to that. You need an objective interpreter who is professional, who's accredited, who can speak that language.
Tile, would you like to pick up there?
Yeah, so I work in a integrated service with lawyers and social workers, and there was a question before about which professional you should go and see. But the great thing about an integrated service like ours is that you can come up with legal and social responses. And so there's lots of there's a spectrum of things that you can do. There's soft touch approaches in terms of you could just write a letter, you could get some counselling from the social worker, and then on the other end of the spectrum, it could be going to court and actually having litigation. But the example I wanted to share today was a very simple one. It was a patient in hospital in their 80s. Their son was sort of saying to him, you can't come home, you're going to have to look at, you know, either private rental or going to an aged care, you have no property. They were living in a house together, but the son was basically gaslighting the patient or the client and saying, you know, this is not your house. So I did something really simple. I just did a title search and found out, no, it is definitely our client's house. He never sold it, he never gifted it to the son. I gave him advice about his rights, and then I even offered to attend his discharge planning meeting, and he said no. I think he felt empowered by the conversations that we'd had. We'd also had some future planning discussions, and there's some really great future planning resources on the Compass website. And we talked about, you know, his power of attorney and how to make sure that he can protect his interest in his property. And also the social worker worked with him to make sure that there were, I guess, supports in place when he returned to the community. So he went to that discharge planning meeting and he basically was able to advocate for himself. He was able to show his title search and say, this is my house, you can't kick me out. He was able to update his documents, and then he was able to engage with the appropriate supports in the community. And so I think that you know, he was able to participate in that meeting to the best of his abilities, and he didn't need an interpreter. But I definitely come across those patients or those clients in my work. We were able to maximize his capacity to engage in that discharge planning meeting. We empowered him by giving him access to legal information, which is a social determinant of health. And then we also were able to empower him. And so I think that was a really good outcome for that client.
And not that anyone wants to go to hospital, Tile, but
Absolutely
sometimes
not.
it can be a really good environment to know that you've got that infrastructure. And also, you know, if you know someone might be subjected to elder abuse, or you suspect that, and they're in hospital, that there are those resources available that they can go to. Look, I think it's time for the poll to see what the results of the poll have been, because this should give us a really interesting insight to people's experience. Now, has elder abuse touched your life personally or the life of a family member or friend? 42% of you said yes. That 42% of you said that elder abuse has touched your life personally or the life of a family member or friend. 58% said no. Number two, do you think elder abuse is widely understood? Now, 3% of you said yes. 10% of you said no. You don't think elder abuse is widely understood, 97%. So what we're picking up is we all want more information. We all want more resources. We want to know where the resources are. And this is a real, we've been talking about red flags, but this is a real red flag. Do you think enough is being done to address elder abuse in the community? 6% of you said yes, and I can't see the bottom of the screen.
94%.
Thank you. Thank you very much. 94% of you said not enough is being done to address elder abuse in the community. Now, the need couldn't be clearer. So in the time available, let's crack on. Please join the chat room. We've got great interaction happening. and our panelists might be able to see what's happening in the chat room and pick up a little bit too. And what is coming up in the chat room is people want to get some tips for talking to someone who they suspect may have been subjected to elder abuse. So much can be at stake. Libby, what's your strong message here in talking to someone?
Okay, the most important thing is to talk to them by themselves, because you don't know if you've got the abuser there with them. And so it's very important. Somebody brought up about how to speak to people with dementia. Well, that in early dementia, they may be able to tell you what's going on. As it goes on, you may be needing to use that question number 6, where you're looking at what's going on, because that's the thing that's going to give you clues about whether this person with dementia, and you may need to get another agency to come and make an assessment. So talking to people by themselves, and then looking to the safety of this person. So that's my beginning of my ideas. Yes.
Tile, would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. And if I could add, I think also to listen to the person, I think that's always a good starting point. And one of the, I guess, time pressure is a very important factor in hospital settings and GP clinics, even in law offices. Sometimes we just lose that time and we aren't able to have that conversation. But an important part of a supported decision-making framework is that we are able to listen and have a relationship, because that's where you're able to hear what might be happening to them. I mean, you might have someone who is a falls risk, and then you realize once you unpack the story, it's because, you know, someone's moved into their house and leaving everything lying around. And so that is something that can be resolved through a legal letter. But I think, so listening and observing, I sometimes get people push back on the believing part, but even if you're not going to believe them, you should at least validate older people, inform them about what you're going to do. So, and it could take multiple conversations, and that's all right. It's important to meet people where they are. And you might need to use, you might need to write something down, blow it up so they can actually read it, explain the purpose and benefit of what your role is, and information that you're going to need from them, and then sort of and respecting their autonomy and what they want to do, because often we often talk about safety, but we also forget that older people also have that right to dignity of risk to make poor decisions and to make decisions that we may not agree with.
Of course, and that autonomy is hugely important. And also, that messages might have to be conveyed on many occasions, given it could be quite entrenched, long-standing elder abuse as well, and rather nuanced. And very key supportive decision-making, and there are resources on compass.info there. Can I bring you in, please, Sonia, on that one? What would you say?
Well, I agree with everything I've heard. And one of the first steps is, and it ties into the poll, is first understanding what elder abuse is. And I'm heartened that there are so many people who have decided to attend today to get educated and knowledgeable. Knowledge is power about what elder abuse is. Secondly, as Libby was saying, speak to the person alone so that you know there's no undue influences, and that really really recognize the agency and the right of the older person to make decisions about how they want to live their life, and ask them questions to kind of understand what their situation is, and also give them knowledge and not education, but information that might be helpful. Someone asked in the chat, are there situations where people don't realize that what they're doing is elder abuse? Excellent question. Absolutely. As that poll just said, the understanding of elder abuse is so low, I think, throughout this country and even internationally. So sometimes the person might be experiencing elder abuse and might not even know that what is happening is not, falls within the definition, and that they might need help. So really helping share information and connecting that person to external supports for someone who might be able to help them is really crucial. This gets even more complicated, and I think this has come in the chat as well. When you have someone with cognitive impairment, you might ask me, well, Sonia, what if someone is really along the journey with dementia or Alzheimer's or something and they cannot communicate? Then your ability to get knowledge starts to change. You need to kind of observe. You need to kind of really work out, go back to, is this right? Have I got that gut feeling? This doesn't look right. And if you can't have that verbal conversation, kind of asking yourself, is this person perhaps feeling fearful, even though they have cognitive impairment? Because that is a human being. And when we have that issue, looking at someone external to the environment that you can approach and speak about their concerns, about your concerns, and see whether something can be done.
Well, that's a perfect segue to our next and final question. And thanks for picking up on those concerns raised in the chat room. What support can you turn to? What support is out there if you're experiencing elder abuse? And Libby, if you could just talk about the support you'd like to highlight today.
Well, using the elder abuse support line is a great. So we've talked about being aware of it and understanding a bit more about it. Using the elder abuse support line, I found that very helpful when, you know, I'm trying to sort out what I should, you know, be doing for this particular person. And because none of us, you know all the information, and so talking to that group can be really helpful. So we've listened, we've believed them, we've validated that what is happening to them is not okay. We've talked to them about what they think they might need and about their safety, and then we need to make some decisions. So it may not be an immediate issue that can be resolved, or if they're really unsafe where they are, then as a GP, I would be looking to get them either to the hospital or into some form of short-term care while we get it sorted out.
So
Or
you would say
maybe
the hospital's the safest place when someone is in peril?
It could be, so long as you make absolutely sure that they understand why this person is coming. There may be also a friend or a family member to whom they could go to be more safe. So there isn't, you know, there isn't a single sort of outcome for this, but we do need to think, is this person safe where they are at present? Are they being cared for? You know, what's going on? Yes.
Thank you, Libby. And the elder abuse hotline, 1-800-ELDER-HELP, 1-800-353-374, 1-800-353-374. Tile, what support would you recommend people take advantage of and resort to?
Certainly. I think I always want to bring it back to the point that we should always ask the older person what supports they want, because we don't want to assume that they want to engage the police. You know, maybe that is a good pathway, that maybe there's been a physical assault or abuse, but they may not want to involve the police. But maybe it's a referral to a service like mine, like the Older Persons Advocacy and Legal Service. There are services like mine across Australia that can provide free legal advice to older people. So you'll just need to look at compass.info or your local elder abuse prevention unit website, because there are services available. And I think too, if a person has capacity, then yes, in the first instance, it's really important to seek advice from a lawyer. There are, if they don't have capacity, then there are services like ADA Australia who can assist people to advocate for themselves, because again, it can happen in any context. It can happen in a nursing home, and so services like ADA can
now
also,
ADA is
the Age Disability
That's
Yeah.
right. Age, disability,
Dementia
advocacy.
Australia can be very helpful too. If
There,
people
yeah, there you
got
go.
dementia,
Yeah.
Dementia Australia is a great service, and you can, you know, they have got a lot of advice and help for people with dementia and their carers, some very good carers groups and things. So
yeah. And I suppose if a person is at risk of financial abuse and there are issues like if the person has capacity issues, and in Queensland, I can't speak for the other states, we have the public guardian who can investigate and suspend powers of attorneys. So they might be similar across other states. It's about, as Sonia said, you know, being informed and finding out what information is out there, because there's actually a lot of work that's already been done that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. These services already exist. And there are also services funded by the Attorney General's Department for Elder Mediation that can support families to have those conversations. They're sort of located in different spots around Australia as well, but they do a really great job of bringing families together. So if the older person's goal is to maintain that relationship, then mediation is often a really great starting point for them to talk through those issues.
But the starting point, I think, is OPAN, Older Persons Advocacy Network, and then you can find Age Disability Advocacy in Queensland and us in Victoria, Elder Rights Advocacy, and the relevant advocacy organisations. So start with OPAN, I would recommend.
So OPAN and Age Disability Advocacy and a whole lot of the services that are on compass.info. And Libby is talking about, you know, Dementia Australia has good resources. We've also heard about the various guardianship tribunals, that are different across the country, whether it be, you know, VCAT or in Queensland or New South Wales. All across Australia, there are resources there, but the absolute information hub is compass.info and the Elder Abuse Hotline, that number again. And, you know, that is to talk through a situation which you might know of, or if you are indeed suffering elder abuse. 1-800-ELDER-HELP, 1-800-353-374. Look, it is my pleasure to say a very big thank you to our special guests today, our panelists, Libby, Sonia, and Tile. Thank you so much. And thank you to the hundreds of people who joined live today and the thousands, in fact, the tens of thousands of you who will watch a recording. Elder abuse is confronting and distressing. It can be hard to know where to turn. So don't forget compass.info and the Elder Helpline to get all those resources. Compass has helpful information and practical information, because that's what we all want, on understanding elder abuse, preventing elder abuse, responding to elder abuse. Now, also, as we mentioned earlier on, we've got a section on future planning, which has a comprehensive guide to powers of attorney and other helpful resources, tools, tips, and service providers. We want those service providers, and they're all on compass.info. Our next webinar is on preventing elder abuse, and it's on Thursday, the 20th of October. So please put it in the diary, preventing elder abuse. It's on Thursday, the 20th of October. We'd love it if you could join us. A recording of this webinar will be available on the Compass website later this afternoon. Stay well, and until next time, thank you. And goodbye from me, Philippa McDonald.